Hi everyone. This week a historic connection was made. You see, earlier this week, Sunday in fact, at 1:15 p.m., phone service worked. Now to be quite honest, this is not the historical connection that I was talking about, because after all, phones have been connected since March 10th, 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell connected with his assistant Thomas Watson. Now that was a historic connection. No, this week's historic connection referred to something similar, but not exactly the same. You see, on Sunday, for the first time in 72 years, phone calls emanating from the United Arab Emirates were able to be connected to phones in Israel. Whereas for years, anyone in the United Arab Emirates who dialed the country code 972, Israel's code, got an immediate message that the calls couldn't be connected. On Sunday, they were indeed connected. And while both people in both countries, and perhaps beyond, throughout the world, celebrated the message in the call, I found myself seeking a different kind of connection. Think about it. Ours is a parsha that speaks throughout its myriad of mitzvos to connection. Indeed, time and again in the parsha, Hashem grants us mitzvos designed to be creating a connection, improving communication, and even restoring connections when things go awry, like in the Eglah Arufa. Whether we speak of the mitzvos of establishing courts, designed to improve our relationship with Hashem's midah of tzedek, of righteousness, or the rules of which Navi we are supposed to listen to the word of Hashem from, or of the mitzvos throughout the parsha, where the words of explanation, laman, so that, or ki, because, give us not only the instructional imperative, but also the reason for the mitzvos that dot the parsha throughout. We seem to be getting an impression that it's not just the doing of the mitzvah that's important to Hashem, but also that through the doing, there is an improvement in the communication with Hashem and the ability for us to improve our relationship with Him. So on a week of communication, to get a worldwide message of connection and communication, I gotta stop and ask the question, what message are we to take from this particular new historic event? Is there anything connected about being connected to the United Arab Emirates this particular week? And my answer, dear friends, and I do not believe it's the exclusive one, is an absolute yes. And the issue is not so much about the fact that some calls went through, as much as the reception of the call on the other end, that of the end of the listener. There are always calls, but there are not always people who are open to listening to the message, or even picking up the phone. The difference between a successful call and one that's dropped is whether there is a connection. And to make a connection, that requires two participants, the caller on the one hand and the receiver on the other. Take Avram Avinu, for instance. We know absolutely nothing from the Torah about Avram's early years. Instead, we first find mention of his life pretty much when he was told Lech Lecha, when he was told to go out and to leave Ur Kasdim. And Sfas Emes, the famous Gerer Rebbe, quotes from the Zohar HaKadosh that Avram Avinu's greatness was simply that he heard the voice, that of Hashem, and he did something because of it. He moved closer to improve his reception. You see, the Rambam explains that when a Navi had a nevuah, a prophecy, it wasn't a phone call, it was a radio signal. It wasn't so much that Hashem sent a direct, clear message to the Navi, but that he, the Navi, had to prepare himself to tune in order to get the signal. The greatness of Avram Avinu was that he stopped to listen, to hear the call, and to respond. Similarly, the Gemara tells the story about two great Amoraim who were extremely poor, Rabbi Yochanan on the one hand, and Ilfa on the other. The two men decided to go into business together to make some money. And as they set out on their journey, they stopped and sat down alongside a dilapidated wall. And while they were eating their bread, whatever precious crumbs they had, two malachim, two angels, came by. And Rabbi Yochanan overheard their conversation. One malach says to the other, "Let's topple this wall and kill them because they forsake the pursuit of the world to come of Olam Haba, and occupy themselves with the concerns of this world, of Olam Hazeh. The other angel said, leave them alone, don't bother, because one of them has yet to attain greatness. It's just not yet his time. Rabbi Yochanan overheard the conversation, but his friend Ilfa did not. And so Rabbi Yochanan asked Ilfa, hey, did you hear anything? And Ilfa said no. So Rabbi Yochanan thought to himself and said, since I overheard and Ilfa did not, it must be evident that it's me who still has not yet achieved greatness. And so he decided to return to yeshiva, and Ilfa did not. And by the time Ilfa returned to the yeshiva, Rabbi Yochanan had been crowned Rosh HaYeshiva, the head of the yeshiva. Rabbi Shalom Razan, my brother's rabbi in Israel, noted that both could have heard the call, but it was only Rabbi Yochanan who was receptive to hear it, and thus he gained from it, while Ilfa let the call drop and the opportunity pass him by. And perhaps this is the message that Parashas Shoftim repeats time and time again. The Torah wants us to understand that we get many different calls for connection daily from Hashem, because each and every mitzvah gives us a purpose. Maybe it's a chance to learn Li'ro'es Hashem, to see the awe of Hashem. Sometimes it's a chance to live and inherit the land, L'man techiyeh v'yarashta es haaretz. And still other times it's a chance to get close to Him in other ways, by realizing what He finds proper and what He considers repulsive. In all cases, a mitzvah behind the actual action is a chance to be connected to Hashem and removing the blocks that impede. To borrow a comment from Israeli Communications Minister Yoaz Hendel about the United Arab Emirates phone move, when we do mitzvos and open communications with Hashem, we too are taking what Hendel called trust-building steps, which are an important step towards advancing interests. Hashem calls, and this week He's asking us, can you hear me now? The phone calls from the United Arab Emirates were not the only calls that spoke out this week. In open spaces in our shul and in shuls around the world, COVID-connected and otherwise, the sound of the shofar was sounded this very morning. The Rambam notes that there's a hint to be heard in the sounding of the shofar. According to the Rambam, the sound of the shofar calls to us to wake up, take a hint, and return. And with the month of Elul upon us, amidst all the other different calls we hear, just what message does the shofar convey? This week, I suggest that the message is not singular to us all. The call is dependent on what way you choose to hear it and what message you choose to take from it. And that's why this Shabbos, our shul is partnering with the OU for Project Resolve. Project Resolve together is a great way for each of us, individual, family, and community, to think about the messages of the past year and to consider messages we haven't been able to hear from them. Through Project Resolve together, we will join with Jews throughout the world, reflecting on the positive ways that we coped, that we connected, and that we transcended these difficult times. What were the good things that came out of it? What were the new habits and practices that we'd like to stick to long after this virus and its subsequent aftermath become a memory? Take the time out to download the attached and to use it at your Shabbos meals or in casual conversation, of course properly social distance. Set a tone for Elul in your home, a tone that will in turn create a stronger feel in our greater Elizabeth Hillside community. The messages of the calls are specific. They depend not only on the speaker at one end of the line, but also on the listener and what he hears as well. This has been true for thousands of years, but in modern history, it's been that way since the creation of the telephone. You see, the first call on March 10th, 1876, went from Alexander Graham Bell to Thomas Watson. And in that call, Bell asked Watson, in the very first message, to please come here. I want to see you. However, in his notes from the call, Watson recorded a different message. He noted that Bell transmitted a different message. He thought that he heard, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want you." The difference, I believe, is precisely the Elul call. Hashem not only wants to see us, He wants us to know that He wants us. If we open our ears to that reception, in every opportunity that crosses our path to connect, we will connect. And neither we nor He will ever hang up. Shabbat Shalom to all, and a Chodesh Tov, u'mevorach, Ksiva b'chasima.